Strong opinions should be rare, and you can get there with a lot of work. But if you haven't done the work, it makes no sense to have a strong opinion about this. You just don't actually know. Have your starting point be, I don't know, can go a long way.
Tim, welcome back, man. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you.
Your book, What's Our Problem? A Self-Help Book for Societies. There's so much to it. And so if you're cool with it, Tim, I'd like to do a combination of things of highlighting some of my notes and having you expand and seeing what kind of flows from there, as well as I've just done a deep dive on so many of your viral essays on waitbutwhy.com that I'd like to talk to you about some of those too. Are you cool with that?
Yeah, that was great.
Let's start first with the difference between being a low-rung thinker and a high-rung thinker. Can you describe the differences and what the makeup of a high-rung thinker is versus a low-rung thinker?
Yeah, well, so rung means this is part of a ladder, which is a vertical axis. And it's a vertical axis that I made to go along with the horizontal axes we have. So politics is the most obvious, left, right, center, right? That's a horizontal, one-dimensional axis. And you have a lot of these things. You can say any spectrum of opinion. You could lay it out in a horizontal axis of, are you at this extreme or somewhere more moderate, or are you in the middle somewhere? And all of those are what you think axes. They're, where do you stand on this? What do you think? What do you believe? And we desperately need to also be asking, why does a given person believe what they believe? Someone has a strong opinion on something. It can mean they are extremely knowledgeable about this. They completely understand all of the counter arguments, and they know all the data on it, and they spent a lot of time with it, and they've gone through a bunch of less certain periods to get to this level of certainty. Or, and it's something like politics, or lots of other things, like lifestyle things, how we raise our kids and the kind of nutrition we should be eating. And there's so many of these topics where you'll find immense conviction, but actually there's not that kind of rigor behind it and very little actual knowledge behind it. And it's this weird human thing we do, where when something becomes kind of a sacred topic to us, in a very primitive part of our brain gets involved and decides this is part of my identity. And once that happens, all of our actual reasoning and learning skills go out the window. We identify with the idea and we have
acceptance of it.
Everything's a scientific method. You're saying, I don't know, as your starting point. You're forming hypotheses with humility. You're testing them by vigorously seeking out dissent and people who disagree with you, trying to figure out where you're wrong. And you end up getting more confident in your view the more testing it goes through, but you're always willing to change your mind. And your deep down motivation is truth, is you just want to get it right. And when you really just want to get it right, you act like it. You don't have to learn the scientific method. It's just naturally what you do if you're purely focused on truth. And at the bottom of the ladder, you're the opposite. You are sure about yourself from this first second without ever needing to actually find, it's like the sky is blue. I don't need to prove that to you. I don't need data on it. It's just obvious, the most obvious thing in the world. And anyone who doesn't believe that must be an idiot, or they're lying, or they have bad motivation or something. But you don't actually have any real knowledge on it. And you couldn't stand up in a debate to anyone. You have this total delusion that your conviction emerges from. And so we all do both of this and everywhere in between. And so that's why there's rungs of the ladder. So the high rungs is just when even though you might be flawed in how you think, you're still more geared towards truth in the end than on proving yourself right. And you will change your mind if enough good evidence comes your way. Mm-hmm. Once you're down below on the bottom rungs, you officially have crossed the point where nothing can change your mind. You can see all the evidence in the world, and you might pretend to consider it. You might even try to consider. Deep down, there's nothing anyone could show you that would make you say, I think I'm wrong about this. I need to reconsider. And so those are two totally different parts of your brain, I think, doing the thinking, and they battle with each other. And I think pinning that vertical axis alongside every horizontal axis to turn it into a square, as opposed to a line, is it just helps see what's really going on. Instead, you can say someone people like to say, and the problem is the far left or the far right. And I think that's a horizontal distinction. I think there are really radical far left kind of lines of political thought that have validity, that are interesting, that we want, at least you can reflect something important. And likewise with the far right, hardcore conservative political ideologies is just a different thesis on how a country should be run. I think that there's nothing inherently bad about those. What's bad is the lower right and the lower left, and these mindsets that are tribal and that won't change their mind, and they're not really geared towards truth, and they're geared towards beating the other side and proving themselves right. And just confirmation bias is the name of the game. And I think once we have that vertical axis in mind, we can just start to see, it can help our conversations, and it can help us see what's really going on in our conversations.
What can I do to become a higher rung thinker?
Well, first of all, just being aware of this axis is helpful, to remind yourself that we do this thing. Like I use the example of Skittles. If you're just like a caveman in the woods and you find a bunch of Skittles, you're not going to know that you're just going to eat them. You're going to think, this is some really high quality fruit I just found. It's delicious. This is amazing. And I want more of this. And if you're not educated on nutrition, you're going to make a lot of bad decisions, and you're not going to have any idea you're making bad decisions. And then you're going to gain a lot of weight and feel tired, and you're not going to know why. And so I think just education, getting to the level where we know what food is junk food. We know what way of thinking is kind of the unwise way. We know what kind of information is junk information. That is what headlines are. This is just junk. This is just trying to rile up the tribal part of my brain and get clicks. And it's not actually geared towards truth. And you can start to see that. So just having this axis in mind and understanding that there's two parts in your brain. One part of it is going to just be totally sensible about, let's just try to figure out the truth. And obviously I don't have all the truth yet because I don't know that much, and life is complicated and messy, and every issue is complicated. So I need to learn a lot before I can know what's going on. And then there's a whole other part of your brain that is really stupid, that thinks, of course I know what's going on. I have my beliefs, and my people like me believe these things because we're good people. And the people who, and you have a few propaganda slogans in your head that seem like information to you, that just cycle through your head, that kind of snappy tweets you saw that prove your point. And that part of your brain is not geared towards truth. It's not good at it. So just knowing that helps you kind of say, oh, I'm doing that thing. I'm doing that thing. I'm oh, so much confirmation bias. Oh, I'm really like, when I'm scrolling through Twitter, when I see a tweet and I realize that it's someone who disagrees with me, I just immediately scroll by it. And when I see someone who agrees with me without really any skepticism, I just share it and I like it or whatever. Okay, I'm in that mode. I'm in that mode. I'm in the low-rung mode. I'm trying to prove my point. I'm being very tribal right now. I hate the people that disagree. Okay, you need to step out of this, because it's like I'm sitting there, I'm binging on junk food. So awareness about it. And then I just think some key reminders, like that truth is hard. Just continually remind yourself, truth is hard. Like strong opinions should be rare. And you can get there with a lot of work, but if you haven't done the work, it makes no sense to have a strong opinion about this. You just don't actually know yet. You couldn't get on a stage and beat someone who really knows what they're doing, what they're talking about in a debate. Then why do you have a strong opinion? It feels good to be like, I don't really know about this. I have a lot more learning to do. That feels great. It's so liberating. It's like a relief to not have to pretend to have a strong opinion and to feel like you have to defend this side of something that you don't really understand the issue that well. So these are just different ways. Just have your starting point be, I don't know, can go a long way.
What does it mean to be the boss of the ideas in your head?
Yeah, I think that people who have these really strong tribal opinions, and they happen to just coincidentally, if you go down the checklist of political issues that their tribe or that their stances, that their religion, people in their religious book says, or whatever, there's some kind of doctrine they're following, whether it's a political doctrine or religious or some kind of cultural. And they just happen to agree with their tribe on every single topic. But that person, sometimes they feel like, I'm right. I have so much righteousness and we're the good, smart people. And And it's actually what's going on is what I see is someone who is a faithful disciple of a scripture or a checklist of ideas. They are essentially employees of the tribe. And so in their own head, the little like inner thinker in their own head is not free. They're not independent and free. They are very instructed by kind of the emotional tribal centers of the brain to know this is what you think. You think what they think. And this scripture, this is what, don't think harder than that. Follow the scripture. So in other words, that I think you're in your head is not, you're not the boss of the ideas, you work for the ideas. And now you'll go through all this effort to do confirmation bias and convince yourself and others about the ideas. You'll cherry pick articles to read and headlines that say the ideas are right. The ones that say they're wrong, you'll quickly do all this confirmation bias about why it's not worth reading, or that brand is bad, or that journalist is bad. And you'll just quickly find ways to rule out any chance that you're going to doubt the ideas. And when you're arguing, you'll be kind of a brick wall because there's nothing that could change your mind about the ideas. So you're not an awesome kind of, I know what I believe and I have my stances. And you're not some kind of awesome tough guy. You're a little faithful disciple, and you're sitting there being a little dutiful, obedient employee of this outside scripture that of this tribe. Now, meanwhile, someone who, again, might seem to that person, if you're in that kind of culture where conviction is strength, someone who says, I don't really know, and I change my mind a lot. They seem wishy-washy, they seem weak, but actually, that person is the big alpha dog in their own head, because that person says, I'll adopt an idea if it seems correct, and the second evidence proves it wrong, it's out. I boot it right out the door like a bouncer. And that to get in, you have to show some rigor. And as soon as something proves wrong, you're out. There's no idea that is sacred in this head. It's just based on whether you seem like it's true or not. And I'm not going to cherry pick articles to defend any certain idea. I'm not going to protect certain ideas from doubt. I'm open to doubting anything. So that person, that thinker in that head, is a free agent, is an independent kind of individual that is searching for truth. The other thinker is not. It's a little employee. It's a little obedient employee doing very little thinking, doing very little learning. When you're not the boss of the ideas in your head, you don't learn anything. All you do is you get better and better at the kind of approved lines about why your ideas are so right. You start to repeat all the same arguments with the same wording that all of your other tribe mates do. You can see it on Twitter. You see something happens, someone puts out some data that's pretty convincing, and then the other side has to come up with a reason that something's wrong with the data, and then they all start repeating it in the exact same wording. And those are disciples. Those are faithful employees. And you're giving away your own kind of magical, independent thinking abilities. This is an incredible thing about you, that you have this tool that can reason and discover truth. You're just handing that away and saying, okay, I'll give that away in return for kind of tribe membership.
As I read your work and then I hear you expand on it, you make it seem so obvious. Yes, we should strive to be high-rung thinkers. We should strive to be the boss of the ideas in our head. And yet, when you go out into the world, you see those faithful disciples, or you see those low-rung thinkers everywhere. I don't know. Maybe I'm not smart enough to understand this. I don't get it. I don't get how this is so prevalent and so common, whether it's the bad boss you had at your last job or just out there in the world. There seems to be so much low-rung thinking in people who are not the boss of the ideas in their head.
Well, it also makes a ton of sense to eat really nutritious food and to not overeat.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that it makes so much sense.
That's a little different though, in a way though, Tim, isn't it? Because pepperoni pizza and sugary snacks taste so good, and they're so it seems so temporarily fulfilling, where I don't think being a low-rung thinker or letting the ideas boss me around, I don't think that tastes good. I don't think that feels...
Tribalism tastes good. Tribalism tastes good. Sitting around, sitting around at a dinner, you go to two dinners. One, you're going to be at 6 people sitting around for a couple hours talking, and one of them people are not so sure what they think. And when you say something, a lot of people challenge you on it and they ask where you got that data or whatever. Why do you believe that? And when you realize you're wrong about something, and then other people are kind of exploring and asking questions. And that is less fun in a primal sense than the dinner where all of you are saying outrage about those people together. You're all talking. It goes back to middle school. It felt good to be sitting around with a bunch of kids in the cool kid group talking shit about the loser, or the other way, sitting around in the uncool kid group talking about how awful those cool kids are. Whatever it was, sitting around in your tribe talking shit about the ostracized person or party is this really kind of primal, kind of low grade, petty pleasure. And the same thing, sitting around where everyone agrees about how right we are and how evil and awful those people are. And everyone agrees, of course, in that zone. When you're in that zone, it's all about, we all agree on everything, of course, because we're all the good people. And it would totally kill the buzz if someone said, I actually think we're being way too hard on them. I think you can't say that in that zone. Everyone would kind of lash out at you, or it would just get really quiet and it would be, okay, all right. Or maybe everyone's just really bummed out. It's just it kills the mood. So I think it is a primal pleasure. Now, I'm talking about the social aspect of it, because that part, if you're just alone, I think even if you're alone, if you're low-rung thinking, you don't know you're low-rung. If you're aware that you're low-rung thinking, you're not. Low-rung thinking is inherently, you are so sure you're right in that zone. You forget that you have to learn stuff to be right. And you are so sure you're right, and you feel so smart, and you feel so informed, and you feel so righteous and good about yourself. And when you're in that zone, I think it does feel good. I think it feels safe, and your self-esteem feels good about it. Now, of course, I think that's very brittle and very thin veneer. And I think that you often, somewhere deep down, you actually feel really bad about yourself. You're in a group being petty, that you're maybe a little bit full of shit, that you're maybe masking some insecurity, and that maybe your ideas couldn't stand up to a real debate. You maybe know this, but the same thing, when you're eating the pepperoni pizza, a big part of you underneath the kind of primitive bliss you're getting is saying, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't have another piece. And then later maybe later that night, you feel really regretful and bad. So I think it has a lot in common.
I would be shocked, though, if that's the crowds you hang out in.
I don't usually, but specifically, most of the crowds that I have that I hang out in now at this stage of my life, there's a very clear theme in that we disagree constantly. You can't get anything by these people. I'll throw something out there, and if I'm being hypocritical at all, if I'm worked up and I send a tweet that's a little bit tribal, like I said, it's maybe the kind of provocative tribal tweet that agrees with me, even if the whole group agrees with that, someone's going to be like, that person's an asshole. That person's not doing good thinking here. It's like a sport to call each other out on being wrong, on disagreeing, on almost taking devil's advocate for. But when something is obviously true, when there is some clear data, it's not hard to get the whole group to kind of say, okay, yeah. And again, someone might, oh wait, something's wrong about this. But I feel like it's nimble. The disagreement kind of makes it in some ways nimble, and it can flow towards truth. Now, this is when it's at its best. There can be topics, there can be political things that come up, there can be things in the news that that same group can slip into that bad mindset. We're all outraged together. And sometimes it's reasonable outrage, but quickly that can morph into, it's gotten very uncomfortable to disagree about this topic. When did that happen? Suddenly it's kind of like the game is that we're all agreeing on every single thing right now. And it's because some of the tribal switches have turned on. So it doesn't matter how high-rung culture in the group goes a long way. It kind of is like a magnet that keeps the group kind of high a lot of the time. And it just becomes the culture. We're really low-rung, obvious low-rung thinking, and arguing makes you look, but you quickly will get called on it. And it's kind of embarrassing. People will just be like, you're being such a zealot. You're being so like, what's wrong with you? But that same group can still slip down. You have to just watch for it. You and your partner, and one other person, you guys can slip into this zone where it becomes uncomfortable to disagree about a certain topic. So you just have to watch it. It's like, it's in all of us. No one's ever cured of this instinct.
Yeah. Tim, I've taken some of your drawings that I love so much from Wait But Why, from your books, and I love to I'm going to share them on the screen, and I'd love for you to Can you talk us through them, and then maybe we can riff on these drawings, because I think they're like meaningful when it comes to living a productive life. Is that cool?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, here we go. Here's the first one. Can you, because there'll be some audio only people, so there'll be some who will see the video too, but can you describe this drawing on your past and your future and when you're born and your life path?
Yeah. So I think I came up with this when I was just like, I was wallowing in my own kind of regret or dwelling on the past. We do this a lot. We look at those black lines. So the idea is supposed to be that between today, when you're born in today, there's a web of possibilities that are all closed off now because you've chosen this path again and again. You've made little decisions here and little decisions there that have led you to this moment. And some of those you're probably very grateful for, that you made this decision, that you ended up here, that you avoided that bad thing, or you got out of that bad situation. But then there's other times when we look back and it's the ones that got away and it's the opportunities we missed. And it's these paths not taken that can haunt us, and we can wonder about them and we can dwell on them and feel regret. But either way, whether we're grateful for things that happened or whether we're regretful about them, we have this implicit, the backdrop on that is that we had agency back then, that these decisions are ours. This life path happened this way, but it didn't have to. This is what happened. But many other things could have happened if we had made different decisions, if certain things had worked out differently. And that's all true. We did have agency and we did make some good decisions and probably some bad ones too. But I feel like what so often comes along with when you're kind of in this zone, this feeling that now we're here. Now this is the life path that we have chosen. So for better or worse, we have ended up on this life path, and now that we've made our bed, and this is it. Career-wise, relationship-wise, where we live, the kinds of habits we have, the kinds of hobbies we do or don't do. This is just who we've become now. This is what happened, and realistically, this is where we're going to be. So it's as if there's all that web of black lines in the past, but then as soon as we get to today, it feels like there's just a singular green line going forward. But of course, that's not true. 20 years in the future, the regrets you're going to feel and the decisions you'll be grateful for, most of them haven't happened yet. Most of them are going to happen between now and 20 years from now. When we look back 20 years from now, we're going to see a bunch of black lines that we could have, life paths we could have taken that we didn't. And so it's a reminder that actually those lines are all still green. They're all still open to us. And something just counterintuitive, but I think very, very empowering about this reminder that there's so many green lines open in front of us right now. And we haven't made our bed. We can change. A lot of those decisions that you're unhappy about in the past, if you learn from them, you can actually take your life by the horns and bring it to places you want it to go, even though you've already made a bunch of decisions in the past so far. And I think this goes for really, if someone of any age, I think you really have a big green tree of possibilities in front of you. And for some reason, it's just not that intuitive. It feels like we had agency in the past, but now this is just the situation. And we feel like that agency is gone, but it's not.
I love it. It's just such a great reminder, a great visual of the fact of that I am going to be the owner of my life. I'm going to have full agency over the decisions of what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. And the fact that there are all these options, and sometimes looking back and then going forward. This chart, I think, does a great job of helping you do all those things, looking back, looking forward, and then envisioning yourself 20 years in the future, looking back on today, knowing today, like you have that agency, that ability to make that call. That's why I think this is a meaningful chart that seems like it's impacted tons of people. There's another one here that I want to bring up that's different from this. But whenever I talk to a podcast guest, email with them, they'll say some nice things. And I'll say, oh, when you meet me, it's going to be so much worse. And that's this chart I send them
Yeah.
from time to time. Is this, you can describe it, but essentially it's really about the fact that if you don't really fully know people, and the more you get to know them, we all kind of go to the center, whether we hate them or we love them, we kind of end up in the middle. But you go ahead and describe this one that I've shared with so many people.
This is a little like what we talked about before, high-rung and low-rung thinking. There's this reality, and then there's this crazy fiction that we can live in.
Yeah.
And reality about humans is that it's messy. Humans are three-dimensional, impossibly complex. It's some complicated mix of deep nurture, life experiences for decades, early childhood stuff, but also nature, temperament, and different things. People go through hard times and better times, and there's their best selves on one part of the week and worse selves in another part. And that so every human is worthy of criticism, has a lot to improve, everyone. And every human is worthy of compassion. And that if you were in their shoes, you'd be doing a lot of the same things they were doing if you had their life story. That's real. Now, it seems like, again, that should be simple. Okay, so that's the fact. And now every human, you should treat them that way. You should always have that in mind. But there's a whole other part of our brain that is the dumb part that thinks humans are angels or demons, especially when it gets to like a tribal topic. But it's not just tribal. You have these celebrities you worship, or someone, an author you love, or whatever, and you just think of them as they can do no wrong. And then you have someone in history that was bad, or you have whatever, someone you hate, or whatever. Or again, when we get to tribalism, political tribalism, it's those people are awful, all terrible. Those politicians, those activists, those people on Twitter are just terrible, awful people. And these people who are in my camp, they're the best. They're angels, basically. These people are great. So I have a 1 and a 0 on the left, because it's almost like digitizing something is putting everything into ones and zeros. It's like people are ones or people are zeros. And that's just this. So when you're thinking that about yourself, about others, you're delusional. You are captured by a complete human craziness in that moment, because that is not how anyone is. No one is a 1 or a 0. No one's an angel. No one's a demon. And so the way I said how well I know the person on the x-axis is just because that's kind of a continually reminder of this real versus fictional dichotomy, is that when you get to know, I don't know anyone well who I think is an angel. And I also don't know anyone well who I think is a demon. When you know someone well, there's reasons for all the bad ways they are. And you know that there's also asterisks and all the things that seem like they're angels about. And they're beautiful and wonderful in some ways, and then they're not so great in other ways. And there's still a range there. I didn't have all the lines go to the same point. There's still some people that I admire more than others. There's some people that I think have really figured out how to be really their best selves better than others. So it's not that you have to like everyone the same or think everyone is equal. It's just that the range maybe goes from a 0.3 to a 0.7, 0.4 to a 0.6, something in there, not a 1 and a 0. And then everyone's in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, you write, if I aired a highlight reel of your most selfish life moments and most shameful thoughts, you'd seem like an awful person. If I aired a reel of your best, kindest moments, you'd seem like a saint. But people aren't highlight reels, and the unedited cut is always a messy mix. It's just, again, I feel like the whole theme of this conversation is this idea of being a higher-rung thinker. I think of being more reasonable, living more in the gray, of realizing that the more you learn, I think that's the thing with this podcast. After 8.5 years, 550 plus of them, the more I've learned now from so many different people from all over the world, what it's really taught me is there is so much more to learn. It's weird how that works, that you just take in so much knowledge and these amazing stories, and you meet all these people, you think, oh, wow, I kind of got some things figured out. It's actually the opposite that happens. The more you learn, the more you realize that you don't know very much. And I think that's like the weird paradox here with this type of life of trying to follow your curiosities with great rigor?
Yeah, I think it's an immature instinct to not just think you know everything, but to think that's good, to want that. And I think
Yeah.
that part of maturing as a thinker is, like you said, realizing how little, just this whole industries that I know I basically have never even heard of. And once you learn about it, you're like, I have no idea what the jargon is there. I have no understanding of how that whole part of our society works. I don't know what it's like to have all these other life experiences and childhoods. I don't know. I don't know what's going in other countries, other cultures. It's just got to feel so different to be in them and to have a totally different set of values. And then you start to realize that what you think of as just life and normal and right and wrong is actually a very specific kind of culture that you were brought up in. So that's one part. But the second part, I think, of but maturing as a thinker is realizing that's great. Like if you get out of that stage where you feel like knowing everything or knowing what's right and wrong in every situation is somehow makes you a more respectable or better person. If you get out of that, you realize that I get excited whenever I learn something. I'm like, oh, I don't know nothing about this. It fills me with kind of wonder and like the reminder that I'll never run out of like new things to learn, and that there's like maybe some dopamine hit in the future when I actually dig in and learn more about this. It's going to be that there's just always stuff to continue learning.
I'd love for you to take us back inside a moment. Let's go to 2015. And at this point, you had met with Chris Anderson. And Chris, the head of TED, the main TED stage is not TEDx, but the main one. He had read some of your work and he wanted you to give a TED talk. And I think you had mentioned, well, okay, that's amazing, but yeah, let's wait a few years until I'm really ready to go. I don't really know yet. And I think the next TED was coming up in 6 months or less or something like that. You shared in one of your mailbags about the piece of advice he gave you when you told him that you wanted to wait a few years before you gave your TED talk. Can you take me back to that day and that story and what you learned from Chris?
Yeah. So Chris has now become a good friend. I really admire him. And we went to dinner. This is the first time I met him. And we were talking about all kinds of stuff. And I didn't even know what my topic would be. We were saying maybe it should be the Fermi paradox about why we haven't seen aliens, or maybe I should talk about AI or different things I'd written about. And I had very little speaking experience. Now I've done a lot more, but back in 2015, I had done almost none. And just my instinct, partially because of just human fear of stuff, but also just the instinct to push off scary, icky things to some future tip. So it's not my problem. Just this very, I think, unwise and short-sighted instinct. So the genuine thought that, why am I going to give my TED talk as my third talk ever or something instead of my 300th talk? Let me get good at this, then go on the biggest stage. I felt like I was in high school quarterback in my first year, and I was going to suddenly start the Super Bowl. I was like, I'm not ready. And then even if I thought that wasn't true, to just, this is super stressful, I don't want to have this on my plate right now. Let's talk in a few years. And I asked Chris what he thought. So what do you think? Maybe I should do this a little down the road. And he just paused and thought about it for 10, 15 seconds. There's no time like the present. And I was like, you know what? I couldn't argue with that, because things happen. You don't know what's going to be going on in 2 years. You don't know what's going to be going on with TED. You don't know what's going to be going on with you. And if you're a perfectionist about big things like that, you won't do very much. And that if you look at how, I always think about like the Beatles, you listen to how their albums were created. It was the last second, like they had to finish it tonight, and they were still moving things around and combining songs into things. And it was messy and kind of rough and dirty. And so many of the greatest creations out there are under the gun, kind of unprepared, and some stroke of genius comes out. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you make bad stuff. Sometimes you look back and say that could have been better. But life is short. Career primes are even shorter. And when you get an opportunity to jump on a big stage and do something, or just say yes, do it. So anyway, these are all the thoughts going through my head at the time. Of course, I was still totally miserable and terrified, but I knew he was right, that it was just like, just do it. And if it doesn't go that well, there'll be other opportunities to come later. So I just try to remember that in general. There's so many, and I still struggle with this. I still make the bad decisions sometimes because sometimes there's not a Chris there to push me. And I'll find myself saying, oh, I'll do this thing I want to do once this other stuff is done. And once I settle down in a different place and everything is kind of calm and I have open time, that might never happen. You just got to take things as they come, do the best you can, and not be a perfectionist about it. And you'd rather, and especially in a creative career like mine, you'd rather put out 200 things and have 70 of them be good and 30 be great than put out 20 things and have 12 of them be great with a higher percentage, maybe. Yeah, I've tried to take that with me.
You've had the great opportunity now because of your work to meet some amazing leaders from all over the world. They're drawn to your work. Elon Musk cold calls you because he loves your stuff so much and wants you to write about him. And there's many stories that go on and on about that. I'm curious, Tim, when you think about people in your life who have sustained excellence over an extended period of time, what are a few things those people seem to have in common?
They make grown-up decisions about their time and about their work. And they have a level of kind of courage. Integrity and courage go together. We'd all like to have integrity, and the times we don't is either usually because our stated values are not our true values. When you say, I care about spending time with my family, and then you never do, it's usually because actually whatever you're doing is deep down a higher value for you in that moment. Then you might not want to admit it to yourself, but it's true. But often in integrity, we lapse on it when we just are too scared to, and it's just feels too risky too. So I feel like people, whether it's in entrepreneurship or in thought leadership or in the arts, continually do good work, and they've really figured out systems for productivity, which often doesn't mean that they don't have the urge to procrastinate. Often they do. It means that they've built systems to manage their own issues. Then they seem to have some kind of courage to put out things that, again, might not be perfect, but they're doers as opposed to the opposite, which is you dread putting stuff out in the world or dread doing the hard thing, and you procrastinate and push it off and push it off. So yeah, they have kind of those things kind of jump out at me as two defining characteristics I see again and again.
What if you're meeting with somebody who's at the beginning of their career? Maybe they graduated college. They want to do good in the world, but they don't necessarily know exactly what they want to do. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you give to that person?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing I would say to someone who wants to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
They're single and they don't want to be single. And what I wouldn't say to them is think really hard right now about who you want and what, and then go and see if you can find that exact person. I would say go on a bunch of dates. Go on a bunch of dates, with a bunch of different people, and as you actually experience this in the world, a lot of clarity will come about what matters to you and what your deal breakers are and what relationships are even like and how you sabotage your own relationships without realizing. You'll have to learn this about yourself, and you have to learn this about the world. And so I would say the same. Someone in their early 20s, do stuff, whether it's you intern somewhere, or if you think you might want to be an entrepreneur. Literally any business is better than no business. Just start any form of business and see if you can figure out how to make it profitable. And if you can't, you started something and it didn't work. Okay, good. Now what's the next experiment? And just start actually doing that, combined with this kind of Steve Jobs mentality. He in his famous Stanford commencement speech has a quote about how you can always look back in life and say, I actually am here because I met this person who gave me a job, and that's why I ended up here. But I met that person because I went to this event, and I went to that event because I blah, 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 because I started this partnership with this person, whatever. You can keep going. You look back and it's this kind of wacky zigzag connect the dots that led you to where you are. And you can always look back and connect those dots, but you can't connect the dots forward. And if you can try all you want, but it won't work out that way. And that to me is liberating, because you don't have to plan 20 years ahead. And there's really no point. You can have a general vision, but it probably won't work out that way. And the only thing you really can control is the next dot.
Mhm.
And so you don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to figure out where you want to be when you're 40. You don't have to figure out how much money you need to make. You don't have to figure out where your skills and talents really are, or what really matters to you career-wise, or who you want to work with. Just pick a next dot that seems promising, that somewhere where you can be experiencing actual work, learning something about what maybe can help you figure out what the next dot is, something that might be fun. If you're having fun, you're probably going to do better work, but also it's one of the years of your life and you only have a few, so they should all be fun. So there's a few different ways to think about the next dot, but you only have to pick that. If you're going to learn something about yourself, about the world, you're going to gain a new skill, you're going to have fun. Those are all good reasons to be on the dot, in my opinion. A bad reason to be on a dot is somewhere where you don't want to do something like this. You don't actually like it, but you can make some money. I don't think that's a good reason in 2023 to go into a dot, because it's just a trap. Now you're going to have to keep making that money because you're going to get used to it, and you know it was the wrong kind of. So I don't think that's a good reason. But I think, or prestige, because what will people think if I do this? It's just, that's such a trap also, and it's not a very wise part of our brain. Who's going to make? Look, we all care about this. We all care about how people judge us and everything. But to have that be deep down the number one decision maker, where you're really doing this because it's going to please your parents, because it's going to make the opposite sex more attracted to you, because you're going to have higher status in some way. That's just, to me, it's just a recipe for unhappiness, because you're going to get used to whatever status or whatever it provides. And now you have 40 years left of kind of doing this work. So I think there's good reasons to pick a dot, and maybe not such good reasons.
Love it, man. The book's called What's Our Problem? A Self-Help Book for Societies. There's 303 drawings. It's as you write, it's a toolbox for understanding our societies, our group dynamics, and our own minds. We covered a tiny fraction of it. I know you spent years and years of your life both thinking about it and actually writing it, and I'm very grateful that it's out. It's a book I've shared and bought and gifted the ebook to many people, because it makes us all higher rung thinkers. And I just appreciate your level and depth of thought. It's made your writing and the way you think and view the world has, I think, made me a better leader, and it certainly has created a lot of cool conversations for me.
That means a lot to hear that. Thank you. I'm glad that's the goal.
Yeah, man. So I highly encourage it. Wait, but why? And if you go down the wait, but why rabbit hole, for some reason you're listening to this and you haven't done that yet, buckle up. You're in for a treat of all of the amazing posts on waitbutwhy.com. I highly recommend that in addition to the book. But Tim, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. I was having dinner before a concert in New York City with Shane Snow, and you became the topic of that conversation, man.
Oh, wow.
So I just said, just because of all the things you've written and done and the TED Talk and everything, it was a fun rabbit hole we got to go down together for a while.
Oh, I love Shane. That's great to hear. Shane's got a fascinating brain of his own.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's great dude. Great dude. One of the first guests ever on this podcast. So anyway, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. And I'd love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man.
All right. Always happy to come on. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, man.